My name is Paul Raushenbush. I'm the Associate Dean of Religious Life and the Chapel at Princeton University. And my question to the bloggers is, why are you doing this around interfaith? Is it because of something that specifically comes out of your tradition that inspires it, or is it an experience that you had? What I'm getting at is, why do any of us do this? How do we get to this point where we view interfaith relations as important? The question of where belief fits into interfaith relations is interesting, because what do we mean by belief? I mean, how do we come by our beliefs? Is it through the tradition, or is it through our experience of other people? I think for me, for instance, my beliefs were formed by the tradition that I'm in, which is a Christian, but it's also equally as informed by the fact that I'm from an interfaith background, so that my family is also Jewish, my closest cousins are Jewish, and so my belief was formed through this interesting intersection between these two strong pulls upon my life: my familial relation and also my faith tradition. Which my faith tradition was never. I was raised a liberal Protestant, so I was never raised saying, you know, everyone else is going to hell. That wasn't something I heard. But I also wasn't raised saying you should really go out and talk to your Muslim, Jewish, and Hindu neighbors. And so I think what we need to do is get more explicit about where in our traditions we find interfaith inspiration. For instance, in my Christian tradition, the fact that Jesus was always crossing racial and religious boundaries. The highest example of morality was not someone from his own tradition, but was a Samaritan, who is a heretical tradition. So these are places I can point to and say, okay, these are beliefs that I've come to that guide me towards interfaith relations, but they're not necessarily, I didn't come to them because I was instructed purely that way. It was also something that the initial question was because I had these cousins whom I loved so much who were from a different tradition, and I wanted to figure out how to integrate my life in a way that made sense. So I am, both working in an academic institution. I'm a religious leader. I'm also the religion editor for the Huffington Post. And so these things all come together in an interesting way. Sometimes I actually keep them in very discrete places, because one of the things I do in my role as a chaplain, as the Associate Dean of Religious Life at Princeton, is I am intentionally bringing together people who never would have come together had I not tried, or we not tried, to create a space for them. So in the interfaith work I do at Princeton, we have very conservative ideologically people dealing with very liberal ideological people. We have political conservatives, political liberals. In fact, right now on my Religious Life Council, which is 30 students who agreed to be in community with one another for the year, all the Jews are observant Orthodox Jews, which is unusual. And so what I try to do in that situation is put aside a lot of the political work that I do on Huffington, which, I have an important part of my life is my point of view that comes out of my religious convictions. But I'm not bringing that into that circle. I'm trying to create a space there. So these are things I'm trying to do in tandem, trying to maintain integrity. But all of us are trying to integrate in some ways our lives. But it's important for me to treat the work I'm doing in interfaith, at least among students, not presupposing a political or theological point of view. I don't want all liberals talking to all liberals. I want as wide a spectrum as talking to one another as possible. So that's the reason that I don't speak at these meetings of the Interfaith Council. I just kind of am there and kind of encourage everyone to talk, but that's not a place for my point of view. Whereas on the web, people can very much read my point of view, So a lot of my students heard about me telling Pat Robertson to go to hell, and they kind of tittered about that, but we didn't bring it into the major conversation. And then as a pastor, my job really, regardless of where people are coming, they can be ultra conservative. I'm just there to try to love and support everyone. So these different things go in tandem, and my work in this as a scholar is, I think, I think it's important. Sometimes the most radical things can have been said, and we just forgot that they were said, and we have to go back and find them. And so I think the role of scholarship is to look back, and in some ways this is a very conservative endeavor. It's to look back into our history and say, oh gosh, it's amazing that someone was saying that back then. I mean, just today I was reading an Anabaptist from the 16th century who was saying, like, Christianity is in its essence nonviolent, and you cannot pick up arms if you are a Christian. That's 16th century stuff. Now, it's in some ways you look back and you say, gosh, that is so much more radical than any Christian is saying today. And so I think as a scholar you try to remember and you bring into the conversation today, and that's what I'm trying to do with my scholarship. My advice for young people pursuing interreligious work is know your tradition, know where you stand. Know if you're a Jew, know what it means to be a Jew. And that includes Reform, Conservative, or Orthodox. Know what that means. Know your tradition so that you have somewhere to stand. That includes agnostics and atheists. Figure out what is your tradition made of. What are the historical influences? What is the morality that undergirds it and that guides it, so that you have a place to stand in the conversation. That doesn't mean that you can't be open. We have several people who I work with who, they kind of describe themselves as interfaith. They're spiritual. They're trying to figure it out. But know that then. One of the things to describe my work at Princeton is that I want students to be able to answer two questions. I want them to be able to answer the question, what do I believe? And be able to understand where they get their belief and how they got there. And the second question is, what does my roommate believe? And how did they get to how did they get into those beliefs, and what are the implications for those beliefs? Because I don't think that you can say that you are training leaders for America or around the world if they do not have a sense of religious literacy, an ability to talk about religion in a productive way. So I think it's part of the mission of training young people is to equip them with the language and the knowledge of other religious traditions so that they can actually lead in a way that is respectful and aware of our neighbor's belief, but also our own beliefs.